A powerful alien fleet launched a surprise attack on a lone human warship. They thought it would be an easy victory. They thought humans were weak, but they were wrong, very wrong. What happened next changed the way the galaxy sees humanity. The enemy expected fear, but they got firepower. They planned for surrender, but they faced strategy. The aliens never imagined that one human warship could outsmart and outgun them. This is not just another battle. This is a lesson in survival, power, and the biggest mistake an enemy can make: underestimating humans. Stay with us to see how one warship turned the impossible into victory. The Zilari Dominion had ruled the stars for centuries. They were an empire built on conquest, their fleets unmatched, their technology years ahead of any species that dared challenge them. To them, war was not a contest. It was an inevitability. They expanded like a growing fire, swallowing civilizations whole, leaving nothing but submission or ashes in their wake. Humans? They were a young species, barely stepping into the galactic stage. Their fleet was small, their numbers insignificant, and their homeworld, Earth, was an unremarkable blue dot compared to the vast planets of the Dominion. The Zilari had crushed empires far older and mightier. To them, humanity was nothing more than an inconvenience, a nuisance to be corrected. So when a single human warship drifted into a contested sector of space, the Zilari didn't hesitate. It wasn't a question of if they would attack. It was simply a matter of how quickly they could wipe the ship from existence. Admiral Xiphos, leader of the Zilari strike fleet, watched from the command bridge as his 12 warships surrounded the lone human vessel. He scoffed. It wasn't even a dreadnought, nor a battleship. It was smaller, a Horizon-class destroyer, barely a blip on the Dominion's strategic radar. The humans had one ship. The Zilari had 12. 12 battle-hardened, war-forged ships, each equipped with weapons powerful enough to glass a planet's surface. It was laughable. "Scan the human vessel," Xiphos ordered, barely interested. A Zilari officer ran the scans. A few seconds later, the results flashed on the bridge's screens. No major energy readings detected. The ship's reactor is running at minimal output. Their weapon systems are not even charged. Shields are barely at 20%. Silence filled the bridge. Then, laughter, mocking, cold, certain. Admiral Xiphos smiled. The humans weren't even prepared for battle. They had no idea what was coming. "This will be over in minutes," Xiphos said, turning toward his officers. "Ready the fleet. I want that ship reduced to atoms before they even realize they're under attack." The bridge crew nodded, their arrogance evident in their body language. They had no doubts. Why would they? No species had ever survived a full-scale Zilari ambush, and humanity, they believed, would be no exception. Meanwhile, aboard the HFY Revenant, the lone human destroyer, Captain Elias Carter sat in his command chair, his face calm. Too calm. His crew watched him carefully, waiting for his orders, but he didn't seem tense or afraid. Around him, the warship hummed with controlled energy. Not chaos, not fear, just silence, focus, anticipation. The Zilari had already made their first mistake. They assumed that the HSV Revenant was an ordinary ship, that its low energy readings meant it was weak, that its shields at 20% meant it was vulnerable. But in reality, everything the Zilari saw was a carefully laid trap. "Captain," his tactical officer whispered, eyes locked on the main display. "They're moving into attack formation." Carter didn't respond immediately. Instead, he exhaled slowly and smiled. "They think we're defenseless," he murmured. Good. The truth was simple. Humans had never been the strongest species. They were not the biggest. They were not the most advanced. But they had something that no other species seemed to understand: adaptability, ruthlessness, and the ability to turn weakness into the deadliest strength. The Zilari fleet spread into a pincer formation, their weapons powering up, their ships boxing the Revenant in from all sides. Admiral Xiphos stood tall on his command deck, his confidence unshaken. "Open a channel," he ordered. A communication link connected the two ships. A moment later, a holographic image of Captain Elias Carter flickered to life on the Zilari bridge. The human captain was seated, relaxed, his eyes filled with something that made Xiphos hesitate for the first time: amusement. Xiphos scowled. Why wasn't the human afraid? "Human vessel," Xiphos said, his voice dripping with superiority. "You are outnumbered and outgunned. Power down your systems and surrender immediately. Resist, and you will be destroyed." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Carter chuckled softly. "Surrender?" he said, leaning forward, his expression calm. "Surrender?" he said, leaning forward, his expression calm. "You came all this way expecting an easy fight, didn't you?" Xiphos narrowed his eyes. "This is not a discussion. Surrender now, or we will open fire." Carter's smile didn't fade. Instead, he gave a slow nod, as if considering the demand. Then he said 4 words that sent a ripple of unease through the Zilari bridge. "You should have brought more." Xiphos stiffened. "What?" Before he could react, alarms blared across the Zilari fleet. Their targeting systems flickered, their shields wavered, their sensors scrambled, blinded by something unseen. The Zilari ships were powerful, but the Revenant wasn't fighting with raw strength. It was fighting with intelligence, deception, and superior tactics. In the span of a heartbeat, the battle shifted. The Revenant's reactor surged to life. Its power readings, once minimal, spiked beyond anything the Zilari had predicted. Shields snapped to full capacity, weapons primed, engines burned hot with untapped potential. Xiphos's eyes widened. This wasn't a helpless warship. This was a predator. "Fire! Fire now!" Xiphos roared, but it was too late. The first human EMP strike detonated in the heart of the Zilari fleet. Their shields collapsed instantly. Their systems flickered and died. Then, the Revenant moved. A destroyer shouldn't have been able to outmaneuver battle cruisers. It shouldn't have been able to fire with such devastating accuracy. And yet, in the chaos, the Revenant weaved between enemy ships like a ghost, striking with terrifying precision. One Zilari ship exploded, then another. The mighty Zilari Dominion, the species that had conquered worlds, was suddenly at the mercy of one human warship, and Captain Elias Carter was just getting started. The cold, silent expanse of space was split by the blinding light of the Zilari fleet as they approached the HSV Revenant. For a moment, it almost seemed like the warship was alone in the darkness, isolated and vulnerable. The alien ships, with their sleek, imposing designs, surrounded it like a wall of unstoppable force. Their weapons hummed, charged and ready, their numbers overwhelming. There was no contest. 12 warships, 1 human destroyer. The math was simple, the outcome seemed certain, but the first mistake had already been made. The Zilari believed that their superior size and firepower would be enough to break the human resolve. They believed that humans, facing certain death, would cower, beg for mercy, and surrender. It was a tragic underestimation. The truth was, humans didn't surrender. Not when the stakes were this high. The Zilari flagship, led by Admiral Xiphos, moved forward, its enormous weapon systems primed. They saw no reason to waste time. They had come for dominance, and this human ship was nothing more than an obstacle, a small, insignificant obstacle at that. The enemy fleet powered its weapons, their targeting systems locking onto the Revenant. The moment of attack had arrived. A warning signal flashed across the human ship, but it was nothing more than a formality. The crew knew what was coming. They had prepared for it. Admiral Xiphos's voice came across the comms, dripping with the authority of a commander who had never known defeat. "Human vessel, this is your final chance. Surrender, or we will reduce you to dust." His words were calm, measured, cold. The Zilari thought of themselves as the apex of the galaxy. Nothing could challenge them. Nothing had ever stood in their way for long. But what they didn't know was that Captain Elias Carter, leader of the human warship, was the one person who had seen beyond the Zilari arrogance. He had been expecting this exact moment, and he had made sure that when it came, the Zilari would understand the true meaning of miscalculation. On the Revenant's bridge, Captain Carter stood still, watching the Zilari fleet on the monitors. His face, often calm under pressure, was now locked in an expression of quiet resolve. This wasn't a fight he had chosen, but it was a fight that would shape the fate of humanity. "We are not surrendering," Captain Carter replied, his voice steady, cutting through the tension in the room. There was no fear, no hesitation, just determination. "You'll have to do more than threaten us to get what you want." A shiver ran down the spines of the Zilari officers, not from fear, but from the audacity of the words. A human, refusing to surrender. How many species had bowed before them in the past? How many had begged for mercy? This was different. This was humanity, and they were not about to kneel. Xiphos's hands tightened around the command console, the calm veneer slipping slightly. "Then you will be annihilated," he spat. "Bring everything to bear. Fire on my mark." The tension in the Zilari fleet mounted. The weapons of the 12 ships hummed in unison, their targeting systems zeroing in on the Revenant, preparing for the strike that would end this pathetic human resistance. Every ship, every crew member, was locked in the belief that this would be easy. And yet, the Zilari had already made their fatal error. The first blast from the alien ships tore through the darkened space between them and the Revenant. The explosion erupted in a brilliant flash, a loud shockwave of energy that should have shattered the human warship into pieces. But the expected devastation never came. The human warship's shields flickered briefly, then absorbed the force of the blast with a resilience that shocked the alien fleet. The Revenant wasn't crippled by the initial wave. It barely moved. There was no panic on board, no chaos. The crew remained calm, following the captain's lead. On the command deck, Carter's eyes narrowed. He wasn't surprised by the alien assault. He had known this was coming. The Zilari were too confident, too assured in their weapons. They didn't see the trap. With a sudden command, Carter's voice rang out over the intercom. "Prepare the counterattack." "Bring the guns online." In an instant, the human warship came to life. Its engines roared to life, its weapon systems powered up with a force that was nearly invisible until the moment they struck back. The Revenant wasn't just a ship. It was a weapon of human ingenuity. As the Zilari ships closed in, confident in their victory, they were blindsided by the sudden surge of firepower. The first shot from the Revenant sliced through the shields of an approaching Zilari destroyer. The alien vessel faltered, caught completely off guard. The blast was precise, cutting through its hull with deadly accuracy. It exploded in a fiery cloud. The Zilari officers stared at their screens in disbelief. Impossible. But there was no time to think. Another barrage from the Revenant hit a second Zilari ship, taking out its main weapon systems. The alien fleet had made a critical error. They had underestimated human adaptability. Admiral Xiphos stood frozen for a moment, eyes wide as he watched his ships falling apart one by one. His disbelief turned to fury. How is this possible? They're just one ship. But that was the crux of the problem. The Zilari were still trying to figure out how one ship could do this. They hadn't understood human strategy. Humans didn't fight like other species. Humans didn't rely on brute force alone. They had learned to exploit weaknesses, to make every single asset count. And the Revenant wasn't just a ship. It was the embodiment of human resilience. Every piece of technology, every weapon, every decision had been carefully planned for this one moment. The Zilari fleet scrambled to react, but their systems were already failing. Shields were down, weapons misfiring, communications breaking down. The human ship had already disrupted their fleet with a single counterattack, and that was only the beginning. With every passing moment, the alien fleet's confidence turned into chaos. The Zilari had never faced a situation like this. They weren't prepared for a foe who refused to lie down. The human warship moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine, launching devastating attack after attack with a calmness that bordered on frightening. Xiphos snarled, pounding his fist on the console. "Retreat!" he screamed. "We need to regroup." But it was already too late. The once proud, mighty Zilari fleet was no longer the terrifying force they had been moments before. The human warship had turned the tide, and now the enemy was on the run. The tables had turned. The moment the Zilari opened fire, they expected a swift victory. They assumed the HSV Revenant would shatter under the weight of their firepower. Their weapons were too strong, their numbers too overwhelming. It was a calculation they had made thousands of times before, and always with the same result. The enemy would fall, just as all the others had. The Zilari had crushed countless civilizations. What was one human warship against them? But the Revenant did not crumble. The human crew did not panic. They had something the Zilari hadn't counted on, a heart of fire that refused to bow to the storm. As the first round of blasts tore through space, Captain Carter's voice rang clear and unwavering across the bridge. "Activate countermeasures. Prepare for evasive maneuvers." The calmness of his command was the first sign that this was not the same battle the Zilari had fought before. There was no panic in his voice, no rush to react. Carter had seen it before. The arrogance, the certainty of an enemy that believed they were untouchable. But humanity had a secret that the Zilari would never see coming. A secret that would change the very course of this battle. On the screens, the Zilari ships were closing in, their weapons primed, targeting systems locked. A sense of dread began to seep into the air. But the Revenant's crew remained silent, focused, eyes fixed on their captain. They had no illusions about what was coming. They understood the odds, but they also understood one crucial fact. They had one chance to turn the tables, and they weren't about to waste it. In the cold void of space, the first explosion hit. The Zilari fired with precision, expecting the Revenant to be no more than debris in seconds. The blast shook the human ship, yet it remained intact. The shields flickered momentarily, absorbing the incoming fire, and then they surged back, stronger than before. A brief but noticeable crack in the Zilari's confidence began to form. The Zilari fleet didn't understand the human strategy because they had never had to. Their battles had always been about overwhelming strength, crushing enemies beneath the might of their ships. But humans were not a species that crumbled under pressure. They didn't rely on size, but on superior adaptability and resilience. The Revenant, though smaller and seemingly weaker, was built to defy the impossible. Admiral Xiphos watched the unfolding situation with growing frustration. The human ship wasn't acting like it was supposed to. It wasn't fleeing in panic or making desperate, clumsy counterattacks. No, the human warship was moving with a calculated purpose, dodging blasts with precision, striking back with impossible accuracy. His fists tightened around the armrests of his command chair. The human ship was playing a game they hadn't been prepared for, a game that wasn't about brute strength. The Zilari had underestimated human creativity and adaptability, and now they were paying the price. "Increase power to the weapons," Xiphos barked. "I want that ship destroyed." But it was already too late. The Revenant wasn't just evading, it was striking back. Hard. Beneath the calm exterior of Captain Carter, there was a deep understanding of one fundamental truth. The Zilari didn't know what they were up against. From the moment they entered battle, the Revenant's crew was working in perfect harmony, as if the ship itself was an extension of their minds. Advanced AI systems, integrated into the warship's weapons, shields, and navigation, gave them a far superior edge. The AI was capable of calculating the optimal strategy in real time, adapting to every move the Zilari made, predicting their next step before they even knew it themselves. The Revenant's evasive maneuvers were flawless. Instead of retreating or making erratic movements, the ship was using calculated turns, sharp maneuvers that threw off the Zilari's targeting systems. The human warship didn't run from danger. It used it to its advantage. The Zilari fleet, so used to overwhelming their prey, found themselves unable to land a solid hit. Each strike was deflected or avoided. The Zilari commanders, once confident in their superiority, began to realize they were fighting a very different kind of enemy. The AI wasn't just about precision, it was about adaptability. The human crew could see weaknesses, no matter how small. They didn't rely on brute force to win. Instead, they looked for opportunities, shifting, striking when the Zilari least expected it. They fought like wolves, not lions, and that made all the difference. Meanwhile, Carter's eyes were locked on the tactical display, calculating every move. He could see the enemy's every mistake before they made it. The Zilari had become predictable in their overconfidence. They didn't realize that the human mind wasn't confined to a single rigid plan. Humans could adjust, adapt, and most importantly, outthink their opponents. "Bring the forward cannons online," Carter ordered, his voice a steady force. "Target their midship. Let's see how they handle the first real hit." The weapons hummed to life, then released a volley of precision fire. The Zilari flagship's shields buckled under the onslaught. It had been a hit so precise that it sent shockwaves through the rest of the fleet. The Zilari fleet's pride, their flagship, was now vulnerable. This was not supposed to happen. Xiphos had believed the humans would fold. Instead, they were being outclassed at their own game. But it wasn't just the human strategy that was shaking the Zilari to their core. There was something else, the unexpected weaponry. The Zilari had assumed the Revenant's weapons would be primitive, given its size and appearance. They were prepared to face a simple human ship, perhaps a slow-moving target to easily dispose of. But the moment the first human weapons fired, the Zilari realized their mistake. The Revenant unleashed weapons the Zalari couldn't have predicted. These weapons weren't just powerful, they were advanced beyond anything the Zalari had encountered. With a speed and force that stunned the Zalari fleet, the weapons pierced through shields, hulls, and defenses with terrifying efficiency. The alien commanders were caught off guard by the sheer destructive force of the human arsenal. One by one, the Zalari ships began to fall. The first to go was a destroyer, its engines erupting in flames after a direct hit from a cutting-edge railgun. It was followed by another, then another. The human crew wasn't just defending themselves, they were counterattacking with a vengeance. The Zalari, caught off guard by the humans' tactical brilliance and the new, terrifying weapons, began to fracture. Admiral Xiphos's voice crackled with anger and disbelief. How is this possible? He had underestimated the humans, believed they could be broken with sheer might. But the humans had changed the rules. The unexpected weaponry was not the Zalari's defeat. It was a wake-up call. The humans had turned their biggest disadvantage into their greatest strength. The Zalari fleet, once unstoppable, was now in full retreat. The Revenant, one ship, a single human crew, had changed the course of history in a matter of moments. The very idea that humans could compete with the might of the Zalari was unimaginable to the alien fleet. But reality had shattered their arrogance. Captain Carter stood tall, watching the battlefield unfold before him. There was no time for celebration. The battle was far from over. But in the back of his mind, a single thought lingered. The Zalari would never underestimate humanity again. The Zalari had made their move. They had struck with overwhelming force, believing their firepower would tear the HSV Revenant apart in mere moments. But as the first barrage of weapons hit the human warship, the alien fleet began to sense something they had never expected. The Revenant wasn't breaking. It wasn't the ship's size that mattered. It wasn't its outward strength. It was the spirit of the crew, the heart of humanity, that was defying them. On the bridge of the Revenant, Captain Carter stood, his expression sharp and focused. He wasn't looking at the blaring alarms or the shaking walls around him. He was focused on the enemy. The Zalari had made a critical mistake, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. "Hold steady, people," he barked, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "This is our moment." The ship's AI hummed in the background, adjusting the shields, calculating the next move. The Zalari fleet was confident, too confident. They had expected this to be nothing more than a routine battle. They had assumed the humans would fold under pressure, just as countless others had. But there was something about humanity, something they didn't understand. And now, it was their turn to feel the weight of their miscalculation. The Zalari had underestimated the very thing that made humans who they were, their unbreakable will and their ability to adapt and evolve under pressure. With a single command, Carter's voice rang out across the bridge. "All hands, weapons online. Prepare to retaliate." It was the moment they'd all been waiting for. The alien fleet, poised to wipe them out, was suddenly on the receiving end of human precision, and the first strike wasn't long in coming. The Revenant's weapons came to life in a deadly flash of light. The hum of its systems, once a background noise, now became the music of retribution. With a sharp crack, the ship's main guns opened fire, their shots cutting through the darkness of space. The Zalari flagship, once untouchable, once invincible, took the full force of the first strike. The first hit came so suddenly, so precisely, that the Zalari didn't even have time to react. Their shields were cracked, their hulls split. For a brief moment, The alien commanders froze, watching as their pride and joy, the flagship, began to list, its weapon systems failing. What just happened? Admiral Xiphos hissed, his voice a mix of disbelief and fury. He couldn't understand it. His fleet had struck first. The humans were supposed to be weak, desperate. Yet here they were, defying everything he believed to be true. Panic spread through the Zilari ranks like wildfire. The once confident commanders began shouting commands, their eyes wide with fear. This wasn't supposed to happen. On the Revenant's bridge, the crew could feel the change. The air, once heavy with tension, now hummed with an electric energy, a shared sense of purpose. They had done it. The Zilari flagship was damaged, and the tide had officially started to turn. But there was no time to celebrate. The battle had just begun. As the first Zilari ship began to falter, the human warship didn't slow down. It was as if the Revenant had been waiting for this moment, its weapons and tactics finely tuned to the task at hand. Carter's voice was a calm yet steady command. Focus fire on their rear ships. Let's cripple their support. The crew moved like a single unit, operating in a rhythm that came from months of preparation. The Zilari, in their arrogance, had failed to anticipate the precision and speed with which the humans would retaliate. The first blow had only been the beginning. The human warship's weapons cut through the void like thunder. A second ship exploded in a violent flash. The Zilari shields, once impervious to smaller attacks, were no match for the human ship's newfound ferocity. Each strike from the Revenant felt like a punch to the gut, each explosion shattering the Zilari's false sense of superiority. Admiral Xiphos gritted his teeth. He watched his fleet fall apart. The humans had turned the tables. They weren't the helpless prey he had expected. They weren't just surviving. They were fighting back. And they were doing it with a ferocity that felt almost personal. Xiphos's chest tightened with realization. The humans were not afraid. They were angry. They were fighting for something far greater than themselves. The Zilari fleet was witnessing the strength of a species that refused to lie down, that refused to be broken. With each passing second, the panic in the Zilari ranks grew more intense. Their once unified formation began to splinter as they scrambled to respond. The human warship, so small, so seemingly insignificant, was now the apex predator in the battle, hunting down the Zilari like a wolf among sheep. Xiphos's command structure was faltering. The Zilari were used to having complete control of the battlefield, but now they were playing catch-up, reacting to every move the human warship made. "We need to retreat!" One of the junior officers screamed, his voice laced with panic. "We've lost too many ships!" Xiphos shot a look of pure venom in the officer's direction. Retreat? The Zilari never retreated. They had never been forced to. But here they were, reeling under the onslaught of the human warship, their pride and power crumbling in front of their eyes. The alien fleet had come to conquer, but they were being humiliated, and they didn't know how to stop it. On the bridge of the Revenant, Captain Carter's eyes were focused, his every decision made with unflinching purpose. "Target their forwardmost destroyers. We need to push them back." His crew followed his command without question, their every movement a calculated, coordinated effort. They weren't just reacting, they were executing a brilliant strategy. Each shot fired wasn't just a random strike. It was an execution of a plan that had been months in the making. The Zilari were no longer on the offensive. Their weapons, once fearsome, now seemed sluggish, ineffective. They couldn't keep up with the speed of the Revenant's attacks. One by one, the Zilari ships began to fall, The destruction wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Every time a ship exploded, the Zilari commanders felt a little more of their confidence slip away. The impossible had become reality. The humans weren't just surviving, they were winning. The alien fleet was broken. The Zilari, once certain of their superiority, now scattered in retreat. The humiliation was palpable. The Revenant had crushed them, not with sheer force, but with precision, strategy, and the undeniable will to survive. Captain Carter stood tall, his gaze unshaken, even as the sounds of victory filled the bridge. "We're not finished yet," he said quietly. "We finish this now." And with that, the final blows were struck. The last Zilari ships were obliterated, leaving the HSV Revenant standing victorious. The Zilari fleet had been shattered, their arrogance destroyed by the sheer force of human will. The battle was over, but it would go down in history as a turning point, a moment when the humans taught the universe that they could not be underestimated. The enemy had learned too late that humanity wasn't weak. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with. As the last of the Zilari ships disintegrated into the cold void of space, a silence fell over the HSV Revenant. The crew stood in a moment of stunned stillness. They had won, but not just a victory of military might. This was something deeper. This was the victory of human spirit over alien arrogance. Captain Carter stared out into the vastness of space, his mind still processing what had just happened. For a brief second, it almost seemed too unreal. The Zilari, the invincible, terrifying force that had destroyed entire civilizations, had been crushed by a single human warship. The alien fleet, once the undisputed rulers of the galaxy, had been humbled, forced into retreat in disgrace. They had underestimated humanity, and now they would live with the consequences. The sound of the crew exhaling in relief echoed through the bridge. They hadn't just survived the impossible, they had turned it into their greatest triumph. But it was Captain Carter who spoke first, his voice carrying the weight of the moment. "It's not over yet. We've only won the battle. The war continues, and our real fight begins now." His words were a stark reminder that this moment, this victory, was not the end. It was just the beginning of a much greater shift. The entire galaxy would know who humanity was now. The battle had ended in flames, but the ripple effects of that victory would be felt across every corner of the universe. The Zilari, now retreating in disgrace, would not be the only ones who felt the sting of humanity's strength. The aftermath of the Revenant's victory would have consequences far beyond the immediate destruction of the Zilari fleet. Admiral Xiphos had always been a creature of pride. He led the Zilari fleet with an arrogance that bordered on delusion. He believed that no one, not even the humans, could stand against the sheer might of his armada. Yet here he was now, shamed by a single human warship. His pride lay in tatters. Xiphos had never imagined that the humans would be capable of such calculated brilliance. They hadn't just fought, they had outsmarted him at every turn. His fleet was shattered, and his empire, once the pinnacle of power, was now questioning its dominance. The Zilari fleet, in their retreat, left behind more than just debris. They left behind the bitter taste of defeat. And the stain of that defeat would follow them, no matter how far they ran. They were nothing but ants. Xiphos muttered to himself, unable to comprehend the magnitude of his failure. Ants that had torn apart his army. This wasn't just a tactical loss. It was a humbling blow to his entire species. The Zilari, who once viewed themselves as the unchallenged rulers of the galaxy, were now forced to rethink everything they had known about their enemies, and about their place in the universe. For the first time in their history, they had been defeated. The realization hit harder than the loss of ships ever could. They had underestimated humanity, and that error had cost them dearly. But Xiphos was not alone in his misery. Across the galaxy, other alien powers were now forced to confront the same reality. The news spread faster than the explosion of a dying star. The story of the Revenant's victory rippled across every inhabited system, transmitted through every form of communication: radio, holograph, and encrypted network. Galactic leaders, once dismissive of humanity's place in the galaxy, now sat in silent awe. The humbling defeat of the Zilari sent shockwaves through the core of every alien empire. The humans, once viewed as a primitive species, now held the galaxy's respect. Their capacity for strategy, their determination in battle, and their unyielding will to survive had proven more powerful than any weapon. The Senate of the Zari Tech Alliance convened an emergency meeting. Their discussions were heated, but the same question lingered in the air. How had the humans managed to defeat the Zilari? The Zari Tech, whose forces had never once been threatened, now saw in humanity a new kind of power. They had never known such tenacity. "We must reconsider our alliances," a prominent senator spoke, his voice shaking. "If the humans could do this to the Zilari, what would stop them from turning on us next?" Farther out, in the asteroid fields of the Colossus system, the leaders of the Diraxi Collective began to draft new strategies. They had never considered humans to be a true threat. But now, they saw them as a wild card, unpredictable, dangerous. The very thought of a human uprising sent chills through their ancient, calculating minds. And what of the other species? The Grillithians, once dismissive of human efforts, began to analyze every scrap of data from the battle. Was humanity really ready to take the throne of the galaxy? They couldn't ignore it. The victory of the Revenant had changed everything. Humanity's reputation had been reshaped in an instant. The galactic powers, once so certain of their supremacy, were now considering humanity not just as a new player, but as a force to be reckoned with. The question was no longer whether the humans could survive. It was how far they could go. Back on Earth, the news was overwhelming. The victory of the Revenant made headlines across the planet. The people of Earth, for the first time in their history, stood united in pride. They had shown the universe that they were no longer weak, no longer the underdogs. But that unity didn't last long. As the dust settled, the question arose: what next? The battle had been won, but the consequences were far from over. Humanity now had a reputation to uphold. There was no turning back from this moment. They had claimed their place in the galaxy, and with it came new responsibilities. As the Zilari retreated into the darkness of space, their fleet in tatters, a chilling message was broadcasted across the galaxy. It wasn't from the humans themselves, but from the unmistakable voice of the Revenant's AI. The Zilari have learned a painful lesson today. Never underestimate a human in battle. It was a warning, not just to the Zilari, but to every species that might seek to challenge humanity in the future. The galaxy had just learned that humanity was no longer a target to be picked off. They were warriors, survivors, and they would never back down. As the final echoes of battle faded into the void, Captain Carter turned to his crew. Their eyes were filled with both exhaustion and determination. The Zilari had been defeated, but there was much more work to be done. The galaxy had noticed them. The fight was far from over. He stepped forward, meeting the eyes of each crew member, his voice steady. We've shown them who we are. Now let's show them what we can do. And with that, humanity's new journey began, not just as survivors, but as defenders of their place in the stars. If you've enjoyed this intense chapter in the battle between humans and the Zilari, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for more, and be part of the journey as we continue to explore the epic struggle of humanity against overwhelming odds.